Let's dive right into this explainer. Imagine a time when Indian elections were just an absolute free-for-all. Total chaos. Today, we're looking at Seshan. He's the civil servant who stepped up, took on corrupt politicians, and literally transformed the largest democracy in the world.
So to really get why Seshan was so crucial, we got to look at the landscape of India in the late 1980s. Seriously, what actually happens when politicians just laugh at the law? Well, the entire system learns to look the other way, right? During this era, democracy was just brazenly hijacked. Politicians learned how to game the system, and the officials, the very people who were supposed to be guarding the electoral process, well, they kind of just gave up.
And the crucial thing to remember here is that this wasn't some distant ancient history. This lawlessness was the terrifying reality of Indian elections just a few decades ago. The conditions on the ground were, frankly, brutal. We're talking ballot boxes being stuffed in broad daylight, polling booths ruled by muscle men, money flowing completely freely to buy votes. It was a totally rigged game. That is, until one man intervened.
Enter Seshan. He was a razor-sharp, fiercely independent bureaucrat who was about to make every single politician in India very, very nervous.
This guy wasn't just another government employee clocking in and out.
No, he was a man who brought a whole new level of discipline to a system that had completely lost its way.
Let's look at how he got there. Seshan was born in 1932 in Kerala, into a family that heavily valued discipline. After studying physics, he cleared the incredibly tough Indian Administrative Service exam back in 1955. And his meticulous climb up the ladder gave him a front-row seat to how power actually worked. He rose all the way to cabinet secretary. That's the absolute highest post in the IAS. This perfectly positioned him for 1990, the year he was appointed as the chief election commissioner.
Now, what's really fascinating about this whole story is that Seshan didn't invent new rules. Not at all. When he took office, a lot of people treated the Election Commission like it was just a purely ceremonial body. But Seshan, he sat down and actually studied the Representation of the People Act. That's the foundational law for Indian elections. And he discovered it was already packed with incredibly powerful provisions. They just hadn't ever been enforced. So he decided to do the unthinkable. He decided to actually enforce them.
He started with the Model Code of Conduct. Basically, this was a set of guidelines that restricted what politicians could promise, what they could spend, and what they could do during their campaigns. Before Seshan came along, this code was pretty much just existing on paper. It was treated like a polite suggestion. But he revolutionized the entire system by taking this document and turning it into strict, uncompromising practice.
And he didn't just issue polite warnings, he took massive action. Step 1, he deployed neutral observers all across the constituencies. Step 2, he strictly monitored campaign spending, really cracking down on candidates who were used to just blowing right past the limits. And Step 3, this is the big one. If there was violence or rule breaking, he didn't just investigate it later, he simply canceled the polling in those booths entirely. Done. Politicians were absolutely stunned.
The culture shock from this was immense. In that landscape, powerful figures fully expected to be able to intimidate civil servants. They were used to ending an official's career with just a single phone call. But Seshan's reality was entirely different. When he got those threatening calls, he simply hung up the phone. Yep, just hung up. He completely refused to back down, and he punished violators across all political parties equally. Nobody got a free pass.
His philosophy was so simple, and it perfectly captures his refusal to be intimidated by power. He said, "The law is the law. It applies to everyone, including those who think it doesn't." Boom. That was it. It didn't matter what state you were in. It didn't matter what party was in power. If you broke the rules, Seshan was coming for you.
Now, one of the absolute biggest hurdles he faced was the voter rolls themselves. Before Seshan, these rolls were just notoriously manipulated to guarantee fraudulent wins. The system was absolutely plagued by ghost voters, duplicate entries, and just rampant impersonation at the polls. Honestly, it was incredibly easy to steal an election when nobody could even prove who was actually casting the ballot.
So to close these massive loopholes, Seshan introduced what is arguably his most landmark contribution, the Electoral Photo Identity Card, or as we know it today, the voter ID. He pushed aggressively for photographic identity verification at the polling booths, and naturally, this met with massive political resistance. Of course it did. It directly threatened to close the exact loopholes that politicians were depending on to win.
But you know what? He pushed it through anyway. And just take a second to wrap your head around this number. 1 billion. Today, because Seshan fought that bitter battle against the political establishment, nearly 1 billion Indians hold a voter ID card. 1 billion. It is just a staggering achievement of logistical and democratic enforcement.
Of course, the political class was furious about all of this. They tried to retaliate to clip his wings by appointing 2 additional election commissioners just to dilute his authority. Seshan challenged this publicly. And, even though the Supreme Court ultimately upheld the government's right to make those appointments, it didn't really matter. Seshan's moral leadership, his authority, it remained totally unquestioned by the public.
But away from the headlines, who was he really? Well, he was a deeply intellectual man, actually holding a master's degree from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. But he was also completely uncompromising. Critics, and, oh, he had many, called him autocratic, arrogant, difficult. Even some of his admirers felt he was, well, unnecessarily abrasive. But Seshan never pretended to be a saint. He knew he had a really narrow window for change, and his loyalty belonged solely to the Constitution of India, never to the government of the day.
Looking at his later years, we actually see a kind of interesting paradox. In 1996, he was awarded the Ramon Magsaysay Award for government service, which is basically Asia's highest civilian honor. But ironically, when he tried to step into the gladiatorial arena of politics himself, he really struggled. He lost the 1997 presidential election and then lost a Lok Sabha election in 1999. It turned out his true genius was in enforcing the rules, not playing the game. He eventually stepped back, lived out his later years quietly, and passed away in Chennai in 2019 at the age of 86.
So what you should really take away from this explainer is his enduring legacy. Seriously, every time you see orderly queues on election day, every time there's strict accountability for campaign overspending, and every single time a voter ID is mandatorily checked at a booth, you are living in the secure, structured democracy that Seshan built. He didn't write the Constitution, but he did something that's arguably much harder. He actually made people take it seriously. Which leaves us with this final, pretty powerful question. Does the survival of democracy rely on having strong written rules, or does it require rare, uncompromising individuals willing to actually enforce them? Seshan gave Indian democracy its spine. He proved that even in a system that bends to power, one fearless person can stand straight and make the laws actually mean something. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning how our world is shaped by those brave enough to enforce the rules.